Welcome to the first video in our series about ecosystems and populations. In this video, we're going to be talking about how different organisms have different roles and relationships with one another. And we're going to do that in three different ways. First, we're going to distinguish between a niche and a habitat. And then we're going to classify community members as a producer or a type of consumer, which we've already done, but we're going to add a little bit to it. And then the final thing we're going to do is we're going to compare and contrast biological relationships, such as predator-prey relationships and symbiotic relationships. So as we talk about habitat and niche, I want to recall that an ecosystem is all of the organisms and all of the abiotic factors within a geographic location. An ecosystem is bringing several communities together into one large ecosystem. And we can see this ecosystem basically on a map. We can locate it on a map. A habitat is going to be inside of that ecosystem. And a habitat really looks at a suitable area for a particular organism to live in. A habitat is the quote-unquote where an organism will live. And we need to be specific when we say that. And this is going to include all biotic and abiotic factors for that organism. How a habitat differs from a niche is going to be a range of physical and biological conditions in which a species can live, basically a habitat. But it's also going to talk about the way a species can survive and reproduce. So a niche is going to be a habitat, plus it's going to give us the how a certain species survives and reproduces within that habitat. One way you can look at it is a niche includes the job of that species. So the job of the species. So this is going to include all the biotic and abiotic factors for that organism, as well as how that organism uses those factors in order to survive and reproduce. Each organism, each species is going to have a range of tolerance, or the ability to survive and reproduce under a certain range of environmental circumstances. So if you think about a plant, if it's too cold, it doesn't survive as well. And if it's too hot, it doesn't survive as well. But that medium temperature, that optimum range that we see there, the optimum range is going to be where that plant thrives the best in a certain environment. And tolerance is one of those things that we look at, and tolerance can be the tolerance of temperature, the tolerance of light, the tolerance of water within a certain environment. That tolerance of those environmental circumstances that allow that species to survive and reproduce. Another thing that plays into a niche is competition. Competition shapes communities by causing species to divide up resources. And competition allows for diversity within a community. How an organism interacts with other organisms is a very important part of defining its niche. Whenever you talk about an organism's niche, you should also include what types of things they're competing with. Sometimes we have intra-specific competition. In intra-specific competition, we have members of the same species competing for the same resource at the same time. Many times we think of intra-specific competition as two male animals fighting over the females in which they want to breed with. Other times we think of interspecific competition in which we have different species competing over the same resource at the same time in the same habitat. So this could be like a lion and a leopard competing over the same food source at the same time in the same habitat. Usually when we have competition, we have a distinct winner and a distinct loser, and many times that loser species will die out. And this is called the competitive exclusion principle. A classic experiment of the competitive exclusion principle was where two species of paramecium were grown in separate cultures under the same conditions, and both paramecium grew. However, when we put those two different species of paramecium together in the same culture, one species outcompeted the other, and the paramecium caudatum ended up dying out and didn't survive. So in competitive exclusion principle, the loser is going to become extinct. Sometimes we divide resources during competition. In the Pacific Northwest, scientists noticed that there were these species of bird called warblers. And they noticed that the warblers, they thought, had the same exact niche. And we knew that couldn't happen. And when we looked at it closer, the different species of warblers actually inhabited different parts of the tree, ate a little bit different food, and reproduced at different times during the year, so they didn't have to compete as much. And because they didn't have to compete as much, they could live together. So sometimes when we have competition, we'll have the weaker species become extinct. Other times we will divide up the niche. We talked a lot about predation and herbivation when we talked in our previous unit. And we talked about producers being photosynthetic and chemosynthetic, and consumers being herbivores, carnivores, omnivores, decomposers, detritivores, and scavengers, and we need to remember those things. Predators will affect the size of prey populations within a community. And herbivores will do basically the same thing except for plant populations. In predator-prey relationships, there's going to be an interaction between an animal that is the predator, which captures and feeds on another animal called the prey. In herbivory, we have one animal, the herbivore, feeding on a producer such as a plant, and an herbivore like a ring-tailed lemur is going to affect the size and distribution of plant populations within its community. When we talk about predator-prey relationships, many times we show it in terms of this graph. This is a very classic model of how a predator and prey populations change over time. And so as the prey population increases, so will the predator population just behind it. And as the predator population increases, then that prey population decreases until the point where this number of predators don't have enough to eat. And so their numbers will decline. And as their numbers decline, the prey's numbers will, as the predator's numbers decline, the prey numbers will increase, and we'll go through that over time. So this is a model that you will be seeing numerous times over the next week or two. Something new here is called the keystone species. The keystone species is a species whose population numbers dramatically affect the entire community structure. So an example of this, and there's many examples of this, but in the waters off the Pacific Northwest, there were sea otters, and those sea otters ate sea urchins. And the urchins' favorite food was kelp. And so as we hunted the otters, unexpectedly we saw the kelp forest nearly vanish. And what happened was, since there were no predators to eat the sea urchins populations dramatically increased. And so they ate all of the kelp. Since there was no more kelp, other animals stopped using that habitat. And so the otters were a keystone species there. As we allowed the otters to come back, and as they became an endangered species and we stopped hunting them, then the sea urchin populations dropped, the kelp forests began to thrive again, and that whole community started to thrive again because we had those otters back controlling the sea urchin population. So keystone species is a species that is going to determine basically the population numbers for many different types of species within that community. The last thing we have today are symbiotic relationships. And there are three types of symbiotic relationships. The first is mutualism. And mutualism is where both species benefit from one another. An example of this is with a tree called the acacia tree. The acacia tree has ants on it called acacia ants. The acacia tree gives the ants a place to live and a food source. The ants then protect the tree from herbivores that are trying to eat the plant. So both species benefit from one another. In parasitism, we have one species benefit and the other does not. So you can think of this as maybe a human having a tapeworm. The tapeworm is going to live in the stomach of a human, and it's going to live off of the food that the human eats. And many times a parasite isn't going to kill its host. So this species that does not benefit, or this species benefits, the species that does not benefit is usually called the host. And so the parasite usually won't kill its host, but it will make that host very sick, and the host won't be able to survive as well. So we have mutualism, where both species benefit. We have parasitism, where one species benefits and the other does not. And then we have something called commensalism, where one species is going to benefit, but the other one is unaffected. Unaffected. So an example of this is there are barnacles that will attach themselves to whales. And excuse me, and the whales will allow those barnacles to move about the ocean and feed on leftovers that the whale is not eating. But the whale doesn't really care that the barnacles are on there. Now, most of the time in commensalism, most scientists think that there's probably either a mutualistic or parasitic relationship, but it's something that we can't see. So we call it commensalism, in which all we can see is one species benefiting and the other species not being affected at all. So that's the end today, and what I want us to remember is that in this video we are trying to identify the role and relationship of organisms within an ecosystem or within a habitat. And we distinguish between a niche and a habitat. We classified a little bit more about predator-prey relationships and keystone species, and we also talked about symbiotic relationships. I hope everybody has a good day, and I'll see you all in class. Thanks.